Is it to say that economic developments, financial crisis, stock market collapse speculations, changes in gold prices could lose all of your investments? Or it can make you money. Financial Argument shares many experts' assessments and predictions about financial developments with you every day with current videos. All you have to do is follow the Financial Argument channel and subscribe to it. In order to support us, please do not forget to like our videos and comment on it with your own views. Finally, you can visit our website address, financialargument.net, and social media accounts for more financial news.
This video posted with permission. The financial and political opinions expressed in this video are not necessarily of Financial Argument or its staff. Opinions expressed in this video do not constitute personalized investment advice and should not be relied on for making investment decisions.
And with us today, a new guest, Ben Jones, the host of the Housing Bubble blog. Ben, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
All right. Now, I'd like to, first heard of you because you were on the Peak Prosperity podcast. You talked about, the 2008 crash, and really before that, how you were seeing a lot of overvaluation in the housing market. Did you want to share a bit about your background in the real estate industry?
Well, I was really pretty much a pedestrian. When in 1998, I moved to Austin, Texas, to take a job in a .com, and my landlord had lied on his mortgage application and said he was living in the house he was renting to me. And so I got his first mortgage bill, and he was paying twice as much for his mortgage as I was paying him in rent. And that was the highest rent I had ever paid at the time. And for months I was like, why on earth would this guy take this whopping loss on renting this house? And he had just bought it, And I came to the conclusion that he was betting on appreciation rather than. So that was my first inkling of a housing bubble in modern times, what we say modern times, compared to the one we experienced in the 80s in Texas and the oil states. But that was largely a commercial real estate bubble. And, I can show you some charts that are pretty clear that the commercial real estate bubble in the United States today is larger than the housing bubble. But yeah, it was 1998. I first started getting this idea that house prices were doing something really odd. And then I moved, I kind of put it aside. I moved to Sedona in 2003, Sedona, Arizona. And people were really getting goofy about real estate, saying that their house was going up $10,000 a month. So in 2004, I kind of became concerned and started my first housing bubble blog. And then, of course, 2 or 3 years later, Sedona was in a serious real estate recession.
And looking back now at 2008, what kind of signals were you looking at that showed that, housing was overvalued?
Well, it's really interesting to me the way people remember the timeline. I can show you blog posts that I was doing in early 2006 showing people losing $100,000 on houses in, say, Arizona, $150,000. So by 2008, the crash was already in full swing, and now it hadn't hit Wall Street or the public's mind as strongly as it would. But 2006, the bubble had already popped, and in a lot of markets, especially like Florida and Boston. I remember Boston was one of the first. And, the little story at the time about Californians cashing out equity and going into Las Vegas or Phoenix, it was true. But like a lot of manias, you only need a kernel of truth. So at that time when I was there were tons of Californians in Sedona. And a lot of them were using that equity. But it created, basically laid the groundwork for everybody to get involved. So locals, their rationale was, sure, I can't afford this house, but some Californian's going to come along and he can pay me for it. So I'll take on a loan larger than I can really handle. And, I'll end up cashing in a lot of that sweet equity, as they say. And it blew up. It didn't work.
Now, as we look at where we are today, I know you have pointed out on, the Peak Prosperity podcast, you were saying that really the housing bubble never stopped. We're still in it today. Can you explain why you think this?
Well, you really can't prove it, these sort of things, with the exception that if it was the same bubble, prices should correct lower than they did in like 2011 or 12. But the reason why was, I was just kind of maintaining my blog. By then I was in the foreclosure business, like 2008. I started in the foreclosure business. And so I was just watching things, and prices were down. And then all of a sudden I came across this article about people in Huntington, California, I think, camping out for new houses. And then a week later, about people writing love letters to sellers, and that was in California. And then shortly after that, a Chinese guy, hearing about a condo sale in Vancouver, Canada, he went down that morning and bought one, pre-construction. And so I started thinking, this thing's taking off again. And I think that had the mania been extinguished in the bust, that we wouldn't have picked up right where we were, with people being over exuberant about house prices and gambling. Basically, the speculation just came right back in. And sure enough, before you knew it, we're back to the reality TV shows. So that's why I don't think that the bust was allowed to wring the speculative nature out of the population. So we went too quickly back to gambling on houses.
Now, how does the housing bubble currently look worldwide right now? I know you recently posted an article from Australia, and some speculating that, look, housing in Australia might fall about 40% in the next 12 months. So it seems like, is this a worldwide phenomenon right now?
Definitely. And I've posted probably hundreds of articles on Australia in the past year alone, because that's what interests me the most is the economics of these manias. And there's no place where it's more clearly demonstrated than Australia, except maybe Vancouver, Canada, and Toronto. But what's going on in Sydney is a classic bubble pop. And yeah, it was in London. It's a much shorter list to say where there's not a bubble anymore. Dubai, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Lebanon, surprisingly, Turkey. But London is a good example because they're, you may have heard that they've got a lot of empty condos in London. Most of them are luxury. Well, those were really built for Asian speculators and Russians, Russian tycoon sort of thing. So it was the idea at the time, if you go back to 2014 or 15, was that rich people are investing in housing and they don't live in it. They just drop by, a week or so. And that's why they're demanding luxury. They don't want an ordinary apartment. They want, something way over the top. Well, that concept spread as far as I can recall, from London, to then New York, Hong Kong, and to Sydney. And now all these cities have got canyons of luxury condos that are dark at night. So, yes, it's definitely a global phenomenon, and in my opinion, it was re-inflated by the central banks, and the governments, and the quantitative easing.
And where are we right now? I mean, that one article was saying that people say maybe in the next 12 months in Australia, real estate could fall by 40%. Are we at the precipice right now of another popping of the bubble?
In my opinion, it's popping right now, yeah.
And what does that mean for the average person listening? I mean, are there actions right now that might be prudent for people to take with regard to their house, right? Is it better maybe for people to be renting right now than owning a house? What is your perspective? And obviously we can't give financial advice on this channel, but just what is your perspective on some actions that might be prudent given what we know about the housing industry right now? And obviously people should do their own due diligence on this, but yeah, what is your perspective?
Well, I don't think anybody's ever bought a house or sold a house because of something I said. And you may know on my blog, I just point to things in the media, with the budget that I have, and pretty much let people make their own conclusions. We're at a point right now to where, if you're renting, I don't know why you would want to stick your head in the buzzsaw that's going on right now in the markets. And I don't know that you could sell if you wanted to get out. But what I'm doing and what I think is prudent is just to get ready. The biggest problem, first of all, let me point out that the markets are all falling, and you don't hear anything about subprime. You don't hear anything about depressed areas in Detroit or none of that. No, this is Sunnyvale, California. This is Seattle. Where some of those neighborhoods in Seattle are down 100,000. Well, first of all, the real estate industrial complex has not warned people. They said this wasn't going to happen. It couldn't happen because the loans were so solid. Well, prices are falling. You're going to get foreclosures. You're going to get a lot of them. Some of those places like Denver, house prices have shot so far beyond what people can afford. And there's overbuilding. They tell you there's not, but we're at the end of a 40-year high in multifamily construction. So one is you got to take everything that you hear from the establishment press with a grain of salt, and think for yourself. Use your critical thinking skills, and maybe get ready to buy some foreclosures. But the other big problem that we have is this convergence that it's not just the United States. Canada's in a rough spot right now, and Australia. You add all these guys together with the big unknown being China. Yeah, it could very well be worse than 2008. Nobody knows. We won't know until we ride it out. But it should also be remembered that lower housing prices are good for the economy. They're good for the workers. They're good for businesses. So there's going to be winners and losers, but we'd all be better off if house prices settled back to their natural level. House prices didn't used to be a gambling tool, and everyday people could afford them. And we didn't talk about them all the time, and there weren't Zillows and Redfins handing out daily advice on what we should be doing with it. In my opinion, we should just get back to that, and remember that getting back to that is a healing thing and not something to be dreaded. Taking everything that the establishment media is telling you with a grain of salt is going to be important in the future, because what's going to happen, it's already happening in Australia. They're already starting to say, oh, we need to cut rates. There's even a central banker over there that's already talking about QE to bail out the housing market. So we're about to go into this thing all over again about, we need to stimulate housing. We need to keep prices up. Well, those people don't know what they're talking about. Low house prices are good for everybody, just like oil or anything else, and food. So we're about to have this big debate again about, we need to bail out housing. We need to bail out Fannie and Freddie. And I hope that as a public, we can get out ahead of this and say, we're not going to stand for it. It's not logical. It didn't work. QE just made things worse. The whole world's now in a bigger bubble than ever. So I would hope that we can have a sensible discussion about these bubbles and not just ignore them, act like they don't exist, or it's a conspiracy theory. We need to have a public discussion about this stuff and try to shake it. After an internet bubble, a housing bubble, and like you said, bonds and maybe even stocks again, and now housing again, the commercial real estate, I think we've had enough of these bubbles, and it should be part of a public discussion to how to get off this roller coaster.
All right. Well, Ben Jones, thank you so much for joining us today. I guess before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers any last thoughts you had? And also, where can they find your work online?
It's housingbubble.blog. Just hope everybody has a great Christmas. And come on over to the blog sometime and we'll chat.